The fourth Fire Emblem, subtitled Genealogy of the Holy War, is certainly well known amongst the Fire Emblem community. But like the other Japan-only entries in this series, the exact specifics of its legacy are not that well known to the greater gaming public. Ever since I announced this retrospective series, there has been one comment which I have seen constantly appearing: Fire Emblem 4 is going to blow you away. You can say that it was with great anticipation that I played through the earlier entries of the series in order to get here. Whenever I went online or was reading the comments, it was with great trepidation to keep myself from seeing a spoiler or even that much detail about this game's mechanics and systems. Surprising to me, my efforts were successful, and by the time I started up Genealogy of the Holy War, I knew next to nothing about the game. So it was with only my experiences with the previous 3 games to prepare me for the 4th that I started my journey into Jugdral. Like with Dark Dragon, Gaiden, and Mystery of the Emblem, Genealogy has received a full English fan translation, with the newest and most complete being Project Naga. Meaning, no offense to the prior game's fan translations, the work done here by Project Naga is on a completely different level. Thanks to this very complete fan translation, anyone can play and enjoy this entry without compromise, and I'm very appreciative of their work. So, with all that said, I think it's about time we actually get to it. Let's examine Genealogy of the Holy War, and really understand the direction that Intelligent Systems took the Fire Emblem franchise with this. Let's get started. Of all the games in this series thus far, it's easy to say that Genealogy of the Holy War had the most turbulent development. After the release of Mystery of the Emblem in early 1994, production on the next game began. At the helm was of course the big 3 of early Fire Emblem history: Shozo Kaga as the director, designer, and scenario writer, Yuka Tsujiyoko as composer, and Gunpei Yokoi as producer. I've been primarily mentioning these 3 for their large impact in launching the series, but it's also worth bringing up the work of Katsuyoshi Koya, who handled the character designs of both Genealogy of the Holy War and Mystery of the Emblem before it. Compared to the prior game, development on Genealogy was far more chaotic, as staff within Intelligent Systems moved teams, at the same time as many production team members moved offices. On top of this, the changes which were planned for this game were so drastic that it began to be moved away from the Fire Emblem brand, potentially donning the names Holy Sword Emblem Kaiser, or simply Sword Emblem. This game could have been the birth of a new franchise for its developer, as within its development time it teetered between being a squad-based statless strategy game, or actually being closer to a typical JRPG with an even higher reliance on role-playing mechanics. But eventually it balanced out in more of a typical Fire Emblem direction, and was given the series moniker once more. On May 14th, 1996, just short of 10 years after the founding of Intelligent Systems, the 4th game in the Fire Emblem series was released in Japan only. Even though, at the end of the day, Genealogy of the Holy War did not exceed Mystery of the Emblem sales, many of its gameplay innovations and systems have gone on to influence the overall franchise more so than any other entry. Oh, and of course this game has consistently been re-released on the various Japanese virtual consoles. Well, it's time to dive into the epic story that Shozo Kaga wanted to tell with this entry. But first, I'm going to speak very directly. Genealogy of the Holy War's story is absolutely best experienced on your own blind. I feel it's obligatory to give spoiler warnings and time codes in any video like this, but I want to really stress how important it is for this specific game. Sorry to spoil a bit of my own analysis later, but I feel that Genealogy of the Holy War not only has the best story yet in any Fire Emblem game that I've thus played, but it actually contains some of the most powerful moments I have ever experienced in any game, period. In many ways, though positively motivated, the Fire Emblem community's air of reverence around this game can make it seem more intimidating than it actually is to get into it. And if you're watching this video simply to get a primer on this game without having to play it, then please pause the video and seriously consider if you want to watch through this story segment or not. Having gone into this one completely blind, I can tell you that just jumping in and figuring out things as you go is really not so bad. Even if you play poorly, your main unit in the first part of the game will get just about any player of any skill level to the juiciest stuff. And I also want to give a special thank you to the fans who made sure that I had an untainted experience getting there myself. So if you were in one of my blind streams and kept spoilers to yourself, or moderated others who were about to spoil things as I was playing, then I just want to give you a very special thank you. Alright, it's your last chance to avoid spoilers. The timestamp on the screen will take you to the later gameplay discussions, where I'm also going to avoid showing footage of any of the big spoiler moments. Oh, and I'm going to do as best I can with the pronunciations, but a lot of these names have Norse origins that I'm sure I'm not going to say anywhere near perfectly. I'm obviously going with Project Naga's translation, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to get all these right, so just be understanding. Oh, and I'm going to be splitting this story recap into 2 parts. It's very, very long, so strap in. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1! Our story begins in a brand new setting, the continent of Jugdral, which is divided into multiple lands: the Kingdom of Granvale in the center, the Kingdom of Verdun to the southwest, Augustria to the northwest, the Kingdom of Seliph to the north, the Kingdom of Isaac to the northeast, the Yid Desert, the Thracia Peninsula to the southeast, which is split between the Manster District and the Kingdom of Thracia, and finally the Miletos District to the south. Our story opens with the continent divided as such, but in the past, all of Jugdral was united under one massive dark empire. At the head of this empire was a man known as Gaul, who made a pact with an evil earth dragon named Loptus, granting him immense dark power. In response to this man and the evil dragon's power which he wielded, a separate god, the famous Naga, along with 11 other gods, bestowed their powers onto 12 rebels, who would later be known as the 12 Crusaders. Together, these heroes brought an end to the Lopter Empire, and in the aftermath, 7 Crusaders banded together to create the Kingdom of Granvale, while the 5 others went their separate ways to form the independent kingdoms surrounding. About 100 years after these events, a war between Granvale and the northeastern Isaac had broken out, with almost all of Granvale's soldiers going northeast for the invasion. They were led by Granvale's Prince Kurth, the current prince in line for the throne of all of Granvale in the capital city of Belhala. With most of the Granvalian army absent, the neighboring land of Verdun invades from the west, with the eldest son of King Batur of Verdun, Prince Gandalf, yes, Gandalf, leading the charge onto Castle Ljungby. Fighting through its meager defenders, the lady of the castle, Ideen, was seized and taken, which is where our hero for this adventure, Sigurd, takes the stage. Sigurd is the prince of the duchy of the nearby castle Chalfi, a powerful knight who is a descendant of the Crusader Baldur. The Lady Ideen and him had been friends since childhood, and so he set off to free her from the clutches of Gandalf by mustering up as many willing souls to help him as he could. Sigurd, along with his young friend Oyfe, who served as his advisor, were assisted by some of the most notable fighters at the time who were available, including Azel, a descendant of the Crusader Fjalar, and his friend Lex, who was the youngest prince of Dozil and descendant of Nir. Also showing up was one of Sigurd's closest friends, Quan, who was also joined by Ethlin, Sigurd's sister, who was married to Quan. Quan is the crown prince of Leonster, the capital of the eastern Manster district on the Thracian peninsula. The loyal Finn, a knight in training of Manster, also joined Quan and Ethlin. These fighters, amongst many others, vowed to help Sigurd in his journey, and even the powerful mage Arvis, who was Azel's older brother, temporarily showed up to assist Sigurd by giving him a powerful sword on behalf of Prince Kurth. With their powerful weapons and allies, Sigurd and the others were able to clear the Verdunites out of Granvale, but he was sad to learn that the Lady Ideen had already been spirited across the border, and thus he prepared for an invasion of the barbarian kingdom Verdun to get her back. At the border, he met his old friend, the Augustrian Knights leader Eldigan, who was a descendant of the Crusader Hazel, to which Sigurd stated that his only intentions in Verdun were to get Lady Ideen back and to stop this conflict, to which Eldigan permitted and agreed to help keep Augustria neutral in the conflict between the two countries. Just after Sigurd launched his invasion into Verdun, the youngest of the Verdunian princes, Jamk, freed Lady Ideen himself, urging her to escape out of the clutches of his vile brothers while he went back to his father at the castle to convince him to end this fighting. After reuniting with Ideen and seizing the castle Genoa, Sigurd discovered a captured young boy named Shannon, who was actually the captured young prince of the Kingdom of Isaac. Even though their two countries were technically at war, Sigurd believed that the young and innocent, whether they belonged to the current enemy or not, were blameless in such a conflict, and so he agreed to shelter and protect the prince until he was able to return him back back to his country, which was an act which gained him the loyalty of Shanon's aunt, the incredibly wild and dangerous swordmaster Ira. Marching even further into Verdun, Sigurd cut through the vile Prince Gandalf and seized his castle of Marfa, where he had yet another unexpected meeting, this time with a mysterious and beautiful woman. After their brief conversation and her departing, he learns from another man in the town that her name was Deirdre, and that she was a maiden of the spirit forest nearby. Legend said that she was forbidden from ever marrying, as calamity would befall the world should that ever happen. Ignoring these warnings, Sigurd moved on, as the last step in his mission in Verdun was to get to the capital, where Jamk had failed to convince his father to stop the fighting. King Batur of Verdun had been deceived by the sorcerer Sandima, who had convinced them that he needed to attack Granville in order to ensure his country's future. As Jamk was ordered to go out and stop Sigurd by his father, Sandima then secretly murdered the king in his absence, seizing the Verdunian army for himself by simply claiming that the king had fallen ill. Before reaching Castle Verdun, Sigurd and his army had to march to the spirit forest that he had heard of, which is where he ran into Deirdre yet again. Sigurd, who was in love at first sight with her, was very happy to see her again, and fatefully, she had decided to join them in order to help them stop Sandima using her powerful magic. After admitting his love for her, Deirdre joined up with them, and using her silencing magic, Sandima was made helpless as Sigurd's army moved in and slayed him, discovering too late the dying king in the seized castle. Returning back to Castle Evans on the northern border, Sigurd was given orders to govern the region from Granville, and in the coming months while he was stationed there, he married Deirdre. Due to Sigurd's unexpectedly elongated stay in the region, the lords of the neighboring country of Augustria began to grow restless. While the previous king of Augustria was a pacifist, he had suffered a mysterious death and was soon replaced by his son Prince Chagall, who immediately ordered his lords to invade Verdun to get rid of Sigurd. Eldigan, who had always sworn to back up and support Sigurd, rode to speak with his king, trying his best to convince him to stop this invasion, to which the king responded to by immediately having him imprisoned. Calling him a traitor, Eldigan's castle of Nordion was then targeted by the other lords of Augustria, with only Eldigan's sister Lady Requasis in charge of its defense. Knowing that they will soon be coming for her, the Lady Requasis requested aid from Sigurd in order to bring everything in the country back to order. Sigurd, who felt indebted to Eldigan and his family, not only out of friendship, but also due to Eldigan's direct protection of his backline in the previous battle, our hero agreed to march out once again. Moving into Augustrian territory, he first rescued Princess Requasis at Nordion Castle, and then followed this up by seizing castles Herrhein and Anfani in the northwest, which is where he also happened to meet up with the world-traveling Lewin, who was actually secretly the prince of the kingdom of Celeste to the north, who had disguised himself as a common bard. Lewin was also joined by his friend Sylvia, a dancer, and in the conflict with some of the sellswords in the region, Sigurd and his army were able to recruit the legendary mercenary named Beowulf. While heading to the eastern castles of Makili and Augusti, Lewin met up with the Silesian Pegasus knight Erin, who had been searching for him, and with her and Sigurd's help, they were able to arrive right on King Chagall's doorstep and take him down. The king was only spared his life at the request of Eldigan, who had suddenly been set free shortly before Sigurd's arrival. This was a suggestion given to King Chagall at the request of a mysterious man named Manfroy. Manfroy, who was the leader of a sect of dark priests, had been the one behind Sandima's actions in Verdun, unbeknownst to Sigurd, and it was at this time that the news that Prince Kurth had been successfully assassinated while in Izak reached him. With Manfroy's plot still hidden, Eldigan stopped Sigurd from proceeding further into Augustria, with him getting him to agree to return the rule of Augustria to Prince Chagall after a year's time. With the current conflict settled once more, Sigurd now also governed Augustria while allowing King Chagall to be sheltered in the north, in which time Deirdre gave birth to their son named Seliph. 6 months into this tepid peace, King Chagall broke their agreement and sent out the remaining soldiers of Augustria to try and oust Sigurd. After successfully captured Mandino Castle in the north, blunting much of the Augustrian attack, Sigurd ran into Father Claude, the descendant of the Crusader Bragi, and his bodyguard Tealt, who informed him that the lead suspect in Prince Kurth's murder was actually Sigurd's own father, Lord Byron. And before he left him again, Claude told him that he was going to the nearby Tower of Bragi to pray and find find out the truth of the prince's death through his divine connection. After Claude left, Deirdre then wished to see him once more, and leaving Seliph in Shannon's care, she headed out of the castle in order to find him. Not far outside of the castle, however, the mysterious Manfroy suddenly appeared, claiming that he had found the daughter of a woman named Sigyn at last. Using his magic to sedate her, Manfroy then took and disappeared with her completely under the noses of everyone. Enraged by the failures of his Augustrian troops, King Jugdral then ordered Eldigan himself to lead his legendary cross knights against Sigurd, and being loyal to his country to the very end, Eldigan rode out against his best friend. It seemed like a horrible clash was about to take place until Eldigan was convinced by his beloved sister Requasis to turn back and try speaking to the king just one more time. However, when Eldigan returned yet again to try and convince Jugdral of something he didn't want to do, Jugdral this time had him immediately seized and then, in front of everyone, beheaded. Arriving soon after this act, Sigurd finally put down the Mad King, discovering the body of Eldigan on the floor. Regretful of how it had all turned out, and filled with concern for his now missing wife, Sigurd's new holdings in Augustria were then immediately assaulted by a gang of pirates who had long resided in the islands to the north. Following a revolt against their former leader Bridget, who was a descendant of the Crusader Ulir and the long-lost sister of Lady Ideen, Sigurd and his crew next marched north, saving the besieged former captain and reuniting with Father Claude. Father Claude had finished his prayer and discovered that Prince Kurth had been killed through the actions of the Dukes Repter and Langbalt, the leaders of the Grandvallian duchies of Frege and Dozel respectively. And of course, these two had then used the assassinated prince's death to frame Sigurd's father. This information was too little, too late, unfortunately, as just after stopping these pirate hordes and reuniting with everyone, Augustria was invaded from the south by Grandvale armies looking to capture Sigurd based on his connection to his framed father. Escaping capture by them thanks only to the sudden intervention of several Pegasus Knights who arrived from the country of Celeste, Sigurd and his crew were spirited away to Luwin's homeland to the north, where they were then sheltered by the queen. Without Grandvale's support, Sigurd was massively weakened, and so Quan, along with his wife and their knight Fen, decided to head back to Manster in order to bring their own army to Sigurd's aid. While they were away, a sudden civil war arose in Celeste when Luwin's uncles, being unhappy with the prince's return, decided to quickly take the country over themselves. Though Sigurd and Luwin headed out to stop them, they were unable to prevent the capital in the south from being seized, following a wholesale slaughter of the country's Pegasus Knights, including Erin's sister Manya. Even though they were too late to prevent this slaughter, Sigurd was able to take back the southern lands for the queen, and finally accepting his duty as the prince, Luwin was presented with the tome Forseti, the weapon which was used by his ancestor, the Crusader Sed. Staying safely in Celeste for a bit longer, Sigurd then decided to take a bold action and march directly on Belhalla in order to settle things. At the same time, Sigurd's father, Lord Byron, who had been mortally wounded by Duke Langbalt, charged through the fields towards his son in order to pass down their holy blade Tyrfing, seeing his son for one last time and passing on the heirloom shortly before his death. Using this powerful weapon, Sigurd then charged through Duke Langbalt's army and slayed him, seizing the castle of Lübeck in the process. Having arrived on the border of the Yid Desert and Izak, Sigurd then lived up to his word and allowed the Prince Shannon to return to his homeland. Before letting him go, however, Sigurd entrusted his young son Seliph to his care, and then sent away his friend Oyfe to go with them to ensure his son's safety. As Sigurd began to move closer to Belhalla, across the entire Yid Desert to the south, Quan and Ethlin arrived with a small army in tow, as well as their young daughter Altina in Ethlin's arms, having left their other child Leif in the care of the ever-reliable Finn. Intending to reinforce Sigurd, they began to march through the desert with their army, when suddenly a pack of Thracian dragon knights arrived, led by the king of Thracia himself, Trevant. Being completely out of their element in the desert and unable to escape this hopeless situation, all of the knights which were led by Quan were picked off one by one, which was then followed by the murder of both Quan and Ethlin. Finding their child Altina, who Trevant knew would later be able to wield Quan's legendary Crusader weapon, the tricky king took her and then returned back to Thracia as the rest of the Dragon Knights assaulted Sigurd from the south. After Sigurd's army fought them off and secured the desert castle of Fenora, our hero sadly learned of his best friend and sister's untimely demises, suffering yet another horrible tragedy. Regardless, he was forced to continue on towards his goal. With only Duke Repter in the castle of Velthomer between him and Valhalla, Sigurd marched through the desert yet again. When Duke Reptor headed out to face Sigurd head-on in front of his castle, Arvis, who was awaiting Sigurd in Valhalla, had his secret agent Ida betray Reptor from behind and use her squad's magic to help Sigurd secure victory over him. With both the traitors who had been responsible for Prince Kurth and his father's death taken care of, Arvis gave him a royal welcome, surrounded on all sides by the magnificent soldiers and mages of Valhalla. Finally seeing him again, Arvis congratulated Sigurd on his long journey, just before revealing his ruse. All of this had been a trap, and Sigurd had just delivered himself and all of his friends right into it. Revealing that he wielded power in the city due to his marriage to Prince Kurth's secret daughter, Princess Deirdre, he brought his new beloved wife out to present herself to Sigurd. Deirdre had had her memories completely removed by Manfroy, all in order to set up her union with Arvis. Realizing that Deirdre could no longer recognize him, Sigurd had now lost absolutely everything. Before being allowed to speak with her further, Deirdre was taken back into the castle by Arvis's guards as a new massacre began. Arvis used his legendary spell Volflame to incinerate Sigurd himself, bringing an end to the conflicts which had ravaged Jugdral over the previous years. Everything had worked out exactly according to plan. In the east, Isak had already been weakened through the war, but the actions of Sigurd, though well-intentioned, had also severely weakened the lands of Verdun, Augustria, Celeste, and Manster. In the years that follow, Arvis used the momentum he gained to once again unite the entire land under one empire, with him as its new emperor. Amazingly, we are now only at the halfway point of our tale, but fortunately from here, things tend to move a lot faster. Picking up 17 years after the slaughter of Sigurd in what came to be called the Battle of Valhalla, we start in the land of Isak, where in the isolated village of Tirnanog, Seliph had been raised to be as much a hero as his father, and had come to be known by the people as the Scion of Light. Though Deirdre had had 2 children by Arvis in the meantime, Seliph was the oldest of her children, and therefore he was the rightful heir to the Grandvalian Empire. Still, dreams of him reclaiming the land from Arvis and his son Prince Julius were very far away, as on this day the Empire had finally discovered his location, and the local Imperial commander Dinan sent his troops after the young Seliph. Whomever Seliph is joined by at this point is largely dependent on if the women in Sigurd's army had children during the previous events. But regardless of who joins him, Seliph heads out onto the battlefield, accompanied by the now adult Oyfe. Meeting the Imperial forces head-on, Seliph first secures the castle of Geneshire to the northeast, where he is met by a familiar face, Prince Lewin. Having survived and somehow escaped the Battle of Valhalla, Prince Lewin had despaired and gone on to hide from the Empire while also supporting Seliph's eventual rise. Together, they discuss about how Prince Shannon had gone off to find the Crusader weapon of his family tree, Balmung, which had been hidden in a shrine in the Yid Desert. And next, they discuss about a girl which Lewin had discovered in Valhalla years ago who had been horribly injured, and whom he had been sheltering ever since. This mysterious girl who had lost her memory was named Julia, and leaving her in the care of Seliph, Lewin leaves, having business to attend to elsewhere. Seliph now leads his troops to fight 2 more armies to the south, possibly recruiting one of the 2 sons of Dinan, who are both in love with one of Seliph's companions, before arriving and liberating the Imperial headquarters in the region, Rivaux, from the evil Dinan. Having so quickly achieved the liberation of one major region of Jugdral, Seliph moves on from this to try and meet up with Prince Leif of Leonster, who is Quan and Ethelin's son who had been leading a revolution of his own all over the Thracian peninsula. On his way to find Leif, Seliph met up with Prince Shannon, who had successfully retrieved his family's sword, and together they next witnessed the efforts of a mercenary named Ares outside of the city of Darna. Ares, who was the son of Eldigan, wielded his father's Crusader sword Mistletoe, and at first he was furious to meet Seliph, believing that Sigurd was Eldigan's killer, before Seliph calmed him down and convinced him to join in their fight. The Liberation Army arrived just in time to rescue Prince Leif, who had been protected by the loyal knight Finn all this time ever since his parents' demise. And together, Seliph and Leif combined their armies and goals and became an even fiercer rebellious force. And next, Seliph's group readies to head into the kingdom of Thracia. To the south, they clash with the mighty Ishtar, who also happens to be the beloved of Prince Julius. And although they defeat her in the field, she's able to be spirited away by Julius before she loses her life. As these two groups were fighting, King Trevant had been watching, and he orders the girl he stole and raised as a daughter, the lost sibling of Leif, Altena, to slaughter every last man, woman, and child in Manster. Altena, who has a kind heart, refuses to follow out such an order. However, the other Dragon Knight commanders around her have no such compunctions, and so they head north to attempt to wipe Manster clean. Seliph's army is able to greet them head-on, and along the way they merge with another rebellious group calling themselves the Magi, which empowers the Liberation Army even further. After the Thracian flyers are warded off, the group next heads deep into Thracian territory and seizes the castle of Cappadocia. From this castle right in the middle of the kingdom, the full weight of Thracia is thrown against Seliph. Fighting desperately, the Thracians send countless Dragon Knights against them, but each wave, one by one, is taken down by Seliph's group. Eventually, Altena goes after them herself. However, Prince Leif is able to convince her of their connection and her theft as a child by Trevant, and after confirming this back home, she too decides to join with the Liberators. Although it causes everyone involved great pain, Seliph, Leif, Altena, and all of the others continue to wade through the Thracian defenders, and eventually Trevant's cruel actions catch up to him. Even the loyal Thracian general Hannibal is recruited to Seliph's side, as his company is able to free his adopted son, whom Trevant had been using as a hostage. When everything is said and done, all of the commanders, including Trevant, are wiped off the battlefield forever. With Thracia now under control, all of East Jugdral has now been taken in the name of Seliph. And much like his father, he decides to stop delaying the inevitable and head right for Granvale in order to finish this. His route there takes him through the last section of our map, Miletos, where the harsh life for those under the Empire's rule truly comes to light. In Miletos, as well as other parts of the Empire, child hunts had regularly been being performed in recent years, and any children who had been captured were to be delivered to Belhalla, where they were changed in some way. As Seliph fought his way through Miletos, they encountered Prince Julius and Ishtar again, and discovered that Julius was nigh invincible. Managing to outwit them and to bore the pompous prince, they next finally cross over into the mainland and land at Granvale, where Emperor Arvis had stationed himself as a last defense at the city of Chalfie. However, this isn't the victorious, proud emperor you might be expecting. The Arvis that we meet here late in his life is a thoroughly broken failure of a ruler. This man, who had so mercilessly plotted to use Sigurd as well as many others before disposing of them for his own imperial ascension, by this point had realized that he himself was nothing more than a pawn in a different game. Manfroy, the mysterious leader of the Dark Priests, was actually in charge of the cult of Lopter, and had been planning everything from the start. In order to bring back their lost god Loptus, who had seemingly been vanquished by the 12 Crusaders, a new inheritor of the Dark God's blood was required, which is why the last two genetic holders of the Loptus blood, the two children of a woman named Sigyn who carried it, had to be brought together and reunite, if you get me. Yes, the two children of Sigyn, who were born to different fathers, were Arvis and Deirdre. And everything that had happened in the previous generation, including stealing away Deirdre, wiping her memory, and orchestrating an event where Arvis would find and fall in love with her, had all been to make a child who would inherit the full blood of Loptus. Early in his life, Julius was a sweet and caring brother. However, at the age of 10, he was presented with the Loptus tomb by Manfroy, and at that point, his life was effectively over. He became nothing more than a vessel for the Dark God, just as Gaul had been over 100 years prior. One of Julius's first actions as Loptus was to attempt to kill his sister Julia, due to her blood allowing her to use the Book of Naga, which he would be extremely weak to. The Empress Deirdre attempted to defend her daughter, and used her magic to warp Julia to safety just before Julius murdered her. After this event, Emperor Arvis, who had truly loved his wife, was completely heartbroken. And to top it off, he could now not oppose his son's twisted, impenetrable power. From that moment on, he was merely a puppet emperor. But at the very least, he did do all he could to hide away the children who were being brought to Belhalla so that they couldn't be changed by the Lopter order. When Arvis saw Seliph's army approaching from Miletos, he made one of his last acts, which was to entrust Sigurd's family blade Tyrfing to a priest named Palmark, who he ordered to flee the castle in order to help Seliph retrieve the sword. He next entrusted entrusted Julia, whom Manfroy had captured just as Seliph began his march from Thracia, with the circlet that her mother had always worn. Although he tried to keep her with him, Julia was taken away to meet Julius again in Valhalla, and so Arvis resigned himself to see what his final fate would be within the castle of Chalfi. Unknowingly due to the Emperor's actions, Seliph is able to retrieve Tyrfing, and with great pity for the thoroughly defeated man, they strike down Emperor Arvis for good. Meanwhile, Julia had been taken to Valhalla, and although she was about to be murdered by her brother, Julius was then convinced by the priest Manfroy to let her live instead so that her incredible magical powers could be used against the Liberation Army, a move which would actually seal the fate of every player in the Holy War. After fighting through the remaining dukedoms of Granvale, a controlled Julia was sent against the Liberation Army, but evading her on the battlefield and bypassing Valhalla altogether, Seliph and his army discovered and killed Manfroy the Master Manipulator, which effectively freed Julia from his control. Although they looked all over Manfroy's lair for the Book of Naga, which is the one weapon which could equally oppose Julius's Book of Loptus, they eventually discovered that the key to where the book was stored was hidden within the circlet that Emperor Arvis had just given to Julia. And this is what gave the Liberation Army exactly the weapon that they needed to take down the possessed Emperor. In the final showdown, Julia's power of Naga thundered against Julius's Loptus, whilst Seliph took him on using his bloodline's mighty blade. And at long last, the Scion of Darkness was defeated. As the dragon Loptus faded away, Seliph rightfully claimed the capital, marking the beginning of a long and prosperous reign, as peace once again returned to the land. It's hard to find the right words for just how much a leap forward this game's story was in its complexity, both in its character depth and the overall events which led to the actions of everyone involved. As the sheer runtime of that story recap might have told you, this is one beast of a game. There are so many characters, countries, cities, cultures, and backstories to get through that nailing it all in the entry that first introduces us to them all seems outrageous. And yet, somehow, they did it. As I spoiled earlier, this section is going to be filled with praise, but let me just get the obvious one out of the way first. Sigurd's tale in Generation 1 and all the other characters in his groups, or on the periphery, completely outshine their Generation 2 counterparts. To be fair though, how could they not? Sigurd navigates through a complicated mess of shifting political allegiances, through his actions fighting back at only the initial symptoms of the mess that the Lopter cult is about to enact upon the world. While I would say that Sigurd is one of the best Fire Emblem characters I have thus seen, it's really not due to his personality. Just like young Marth, Alm/Celica, and then older Marth, he's brave and just and would do anything to protect his friends. Like a young knight would be, he's honest and romantic, and this actually makes him rather naive, which is what ultimately leads to his downfall. He's really not unlike Ned Stark from A Game of Thrones, which is fitting because both of these works actually came out in the same year. There's a lot to dig into when it comes to analyzing Sigurd and the world that he finds himself in. Seliph, on the other hand, well, stop me if this sounds familiar, but an inexperienced boy of prophecy takes up arms in order to get vengeance on the empire that killed his parents. Yes, this is just Marth's story yet again, and just like the story of the Star Lord Marth, Seliph mainly just travels from place to place, winning every single battle. Hell, Seliph even does one better than his predecessor by skipping conquering the entire world before just jumping right to the end and finishing off the entire evil regime which had held the entire continent in a stranglehold for the last 17 years. Compared to the struggles and tragedies seen in Generation 1, Seliph wins so easily that it kind of seems like everything that he went through was just set up for him to win, and oh, hey, wait a minute, that's exactly what happens. We find out throughout the course of Generation 2 that besides being the rightful heir to the Empire, Seliph actually did have multiple people who were working to prop him up, with two extremely important ones being Prince Lewin and Emperor Arvis. Seliph is absolutely set up to win, and even though he definitely does accomplish a lot on his own, at the end of the day, his struggle feels a lot more artificial than his father's, or even to those around him. Arvis in particular, whose rise in Generation 1 and fall in Generation 2 makes him one of the most fascinating character studies in any RPG that I've ever played. After tricking and roasting the entire Generation 1 group, you'd think that this character would be completely irredeemable for the rest of the game. Arvis takes drastic action in an unforgiving world in order to take his power, it's true. And although his rival Sigurd is the one to die first, Arvis is actually punished worse, by being forced to live through the crumbling of his own dreams and empire. It turns out that even though Arvis is willing to do anything to achieve his dreams of peace, he ends up being the victim of those who would do even more. Due to most of Generation 2's best moments actually happening in the background and not to our protagonist, even great tragedies like the decline of Arvis don't hit home in quite the same way as some of the key moments in Generation 1.
Man, are they gonna kill Ethlyn's baby as well? Hold tight, Altina. I'll protect you no matter what. Aww. Quan, goodbye. Finn, I entrust Leaf to you, huh? I'm sad now, you guys. I really liked Quan. And his wife. I don't think it's a good idea if she's the heir of Naga. Is she gonna do nothing about it? Aww. Damn you, Arvis. And thus comes the end of an era. Well, many heroes lost their lives on this path. Quan, the Prince of Leonster. Oh yeah, now Quan, Eldigan, and Sigurd are all dead. Aww.
It's safe to say that nothing in Generation 2 hit me as hard as any of those, and that seems to be the case for most of the players that I've heard from. Still, even though the story's strengths and weaknesses are extremely lopsided, the scope and impact that it had as a whole are really on a different scale compared to the previous 3 games. Shouzo Kaga was able to deliver on a new narrative in a new setting with an even bigger scale. And accepting its few flaws, it's no challenge at all for me to call this one of the greatest plots I've ever seen. I really can't give enough thanks to the people who recommended that I went in blind to this one, and also a big thanks to the people in my chat during my streams to make sure that I stayed that way. Even though we have just spent a massive amount of time tackling the story of this game, we're actually only getting started in our analysis. On top of this unprecedented tale, when it came to its gameplay, Intelligent Systems also delivered their most diverse and different entry yet, and we have a lot to tackle in the sections to come. In some ways, Genealogy of the Holy War is like an alternate version of Fire Emblem Gaiden. The final product, at the end of the day, was unmistakably a Fire Emblem game, but the core concepts and interpretations of its elements were so fundamentally different that it's kind of not at the same time. There are so many new or tweaked systems in this game that I'm actually going to be breaking down my gameplay discussion into 3 chapters just to keep my systems discussions focused and somewhat understandable, I hope. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Almost every battle in this game will begin in a castle, which fundamentally change a whole lot of things about this game. First of all, in a way, this is your deployment screen. Any units that you don't want to send out can just remain right inside here. And while they're inside, they're able to go into the town, which includes a lot of options, such as the blacksmith, the pawnbroker, the supply, arena, augury, and armory. Outside of this town, when they're just in the castle, there are a few other mechanics, such as this now being the place where you promote your units, who no longer need to use an item to do so, and can also only promote when they hit level 20, because this game now uses a raised level cap of 30, and that doesn't reset when you get promoted. You'll just be going from 20 to 30 while in your new class. A lot of things in this castle fundamentally change the way the game is played, and in prior entries of this retrospective series, specifically the very first one, I lamented about the actual mechanics of doing things like on-map inventory inventory management, about how trading and shopping just uses up turns upon turns upon turns, something which is especially aggravating at the end of battles when all enemies are gone and you just want to get things organized and move on. Well, imagine my surprise to find out that this system fixes absolutely all of that. Utilizing any of the town services, including, most interestingly, the arena, does not use up your unit's action. Right at the start, or later on in the battles for all units who go back to their home castle, you can do all of this management without needing to cycle through endless turns. While for some of these, such as accessing the supply or augury, doesn't really have an effect on gameplay, 3 of these in particular do have an enormous impact on how this game is played, and those 3 are the blacksmith, the pawnbroker, and the arena. Let's start with the blacksmith. Any and all weapons that you own can be repaired back to full use using your unit's gold, which is actually a big departure from running through disposable weapons in prior entries. Instead, here, your weapons are a lot more permanent. While this can mean that, yes, your crappy iron swords and spears are never going to fully break as long as you remember to take them back to the shop, this also means that your legendary weapons, which really tilt the battles in your favor, are only restricted in usage by your gold supply. By the way, that gold supply plays very heavily into the next game changer here, which is the pawnbroker. You see, units in this game can no longer trade directly with each other. The only way to transfer weapons or items from one unit to another is to have one go to the pawn shop, sell the desired item to the pawnbroker for half its worth, and then have your other unit go to the pawn shop and buy it back at its full price. This can seem like a bit of an arbitrary system, but it becomes a lot more complicated when you add in the fact that all units in this game have their own individual gold supply. That's right, there's no more sharing your army's gold into one collective pot. Every one of your soldiers has their own unique wallet, and other than the one thief that is available in each generation, who can actually give their gold to anyone, as well as between units which have become lovers, who can also trade their gold between each other, there's no other way of getting your gold around. It might sound a little bit bizarre, but really at the end of the day, this is all just a complicated way of saying that transferring items between your units in this game comes with a literal cost. And it also means that managing your units' wallets can be just as important to strategize when you're out on the field. After all, there are only a few ways for units to make money in this game. You can use thieves to attack enemies and mug all the gold off of them, which is risky. You could also have your unit be the one who rescues villages on maps, which definitely requires planning, or you can get a kind of salary at the start of each chapter, which requires you to finish entire missions in order to get. But actually, the most reliable way of making money is the last thing on our list, and that is participating in and winning at the arena. To be quite honest, I am very torn on the mechanics of using the arena in this game. Let's start off with the basics. In each mission, when you go to the arena, your units are able to go against 7 challengers, with each win getting them successively more gold and experience. Once they have beaten all 7 challengers during the mission, that unit can no longer access the arena until you start the next mission. This all seems reasonable so far, but here's the thing. For the first time ever, losing in the arena does not end in death for your character. They'll simply have their health reduced to 1, but other than that, no penalty. For some units who actually fight better at low health, getting them through their arena challenges can be a matter of simply retrying over and over again, even with just 1 health, so that you can stumble into the RNG that nets them a better fight until they just win. Keep in mind that you don't have to wager any money to use the arena in this entry, and also your unit isn't losing any turns by making their attempts. In fact, the only negative expenditure at the arena is losing the durability of your weapons, which in almost all cases can be easily repaired at the blacksmith back to full quality just from a minor pittance of your arena profits. Oh, and I should also add in that if your character does win, then your unit will instantly be healed back to full health for free, which is convenient because it does make them ready to take on the next challenger, but it can also allow for some really absurd strategies, such as retreating a heavily injured unit into a castle, which does use up their action, yes, but on the following turn you can have them fight an easy arena battle for the free healing, and then send them back out into the field without using up a turn to get that win, so that they can fight anew once more. It's all a bit strange how this functions, but where it gets a bit insidious is when you can start to feel that putting everyone through this arena grind is a bit of a necessity for not just taking on the later missions bigger challenges, but also in getting each unit the kind of gold that they'll need to make more than just the most basic item transfers. For me, the start of each mission always began with a bit of a grind fest, one that paid off in gold and experience a bit too well to be ignored. Honestly, I'm of multiple minds when it comes to these home castle mechanics. I definitely love the ability to access the supply, armor, and blacksmith with multiple units without having to burn through turns like candy. I actually find the pawnbroker system completely inoffensive. It's actually an interesting enough way to force you to plan out not just managing your strategies, but also managing your expenses. But to me, the arena is a bit too, well, I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but overly reliable? Ignoring the arena is basically just ignoring free money and free experience every single mission. Even if your character can't beat all of the 7 fighters, not giving the first couple a try is the same as just leaving money and experience on the floor. Like I say, it's just a bit strange how it all functions. It's certainly an interesting direction to take, but I'm not really sure that it's a very sustainable one for future games. Anyways, I think that's enough of the home castle already, because we're going to be analyzing something just a little bit more exciting next. Going outside and dating. The support system of Genealogy of the Holy War might be the most influential addition to the series from this game, something which is kind of amusing when you understand that it was a bit of a last-minute inclusion by Saga, as romance systems happened to be in gaming around that time. Note that the first Harvest Moon game, which was also well known for allowing you to romance and marry various town girls on top of your already busy life, came out in the same year as Genealogy of the Holy War. When it comes to blooming love on a battlefield, the actual ways that the romance works is vastly underwhelming when compared to the complexity of the actual results. There is a lot to go into here, so we're going to start off with the most confusing topics. What is Holy Blood and how does it function? Thankfully, because this game does menus very well, there is actually an option on every character stat sheet which can show you if they are the inheritors of any of the Crusader's Holy Blood. Its biggest effect comes into play by allowing characters with major Holy Blood to wield some of the most powerful weapons in the game, on top of receiving a lot more stat growth when leveling up. Characters with minor Holy Blood don't get the special weapons, and also only get half of the special stat growths. Still quite an upgrade compared to your non-holy units. As for how that works with the support system, I'm going to use the character Lewin as an example. Lewin is met in Chapter 2 of this game, and he carries the Holy Blood of Ced the Crusader, whose famous weapon was the extremely powerful Forseti Wind Tome. It is possible to have Lewin romance and marry any of the single female characters in your army, but in this game, the children born are predetermined by the mother. For some of Lewin's pairings, his wife will give birth to a son or daughter mage who will inherit the ability to use Forseti, but for other pairings, his children will have no magical aptitude, and the Crusader weapon will essentially be unusable by his second generation. The way that Holy Blood can transfer down and how it can allow or block your usage of the available Crusader weapons is remarkably complicated. But this isn't the only inheritance, which finally brings me to another big addition in this game: skills. The skills system of Genealogy, like the support system, would go on to be another extremely important addition that would go far into the series. Essentially, there are 18 possible skills that each unit can have. 16 if you want to take out the steal and dance skills, which are basically additional actions for certain classes. So, these 16 other passive skills basically turn what used to be complete RNG, such as the likelihood of landing critical attacks, into something more of a controllable aspect for your characters. Some of these skills are gained by promoting your units, such as the Pavis damage blocking skill gained when an Armor Knight upgrades to a General. However, most of these are just part of your character's starting stat sheet. Let's compare the game's obligatory starting Cavaliers, Noish and Alec. Noish has high strength and the critical skill, which can allow him to hit big but infrequent criticals, whereas Alec has low strength but the pursuit skill, which allows him to very reliably hit double attacks, albeit with less damage for each one. Personally, I really love how the skill system is able to differentiate your fighters, even when they're the same classes like this. But where this moves into utter brilliance is exactly what this chapter is about: inheritance. Just like how you can plan out your Holy Blood combinations with a bit of foresight or experience, both the mother and fathers that you choose will pass down all of their skills to their children, which can naturally lead to some combinations which are simply way better than others. Like I said, the possibilities here are enormous, and I haven't even gotten into how inventory items are handed down based on both parent and gender. I'm just going to say that that personally, I almost never go for the optimal routes in games. I usually just ship my characters based on my personal headcanons, or who I thought would make a cute pair, and somehow I still wound up with great units in the second half of the game. So powerful are these skills that it's almost impossible to end up with a complete bunch of losers. So with a vague idea of all these inheritance rules, and with all of these possibilities, let's talk about how your units even fall in love. Essentially, all of your single units have a secret love stat for each potential partner in the game, and when that love stat goes over a certain number, they're in love. The first sign of this that you may notice is that they are now able to transfer money out on the field, or that when you go into the same home castle as each other, they will have an adorable little exchange at the door upon seeing each other after their status change. There are many different ways to affect this love stat, with some dialogue options between certain units leading to massive unseen boosts to their affection ratings with certain characters. And fortunately, the game also smartly raises the love rating for units which join later in the story so that you won't accidentally get a pairing you're unhappy with due to certain units simply having a longer exposure to each other. That being said, it is very easy to suddenly find that two units you didn't even know were interested in each other are suddenly married. It just happens sometimes. Though there are some of these special cases, the most reliable way to raise two units' affections with each other is to simply have them wait next to each other. Similar to the arena system, this unfortunately also is a little bit too easily gamed. Though each mission smartly stops all love growth after the first 50 turns, which prevents you from pairing two units up who may have literally just met the same day, even though that's exactly the story of what a certain main character does in this game. Simply not using your first 50 turns to grind out your desired pairing's love points is the same as just leaving the love points on the floor. In some of the calmer battles here, using your time wisely to game this system becomes a bit of a routine. You're likely just going to use the first couple turns to get everyone through the arena, and then use all of your turns up until the 50th one to get your supports closer and closer to marrying. After that's all done, just play the map like a normal Fire Emblem game. So once again, this is another very bold and influential change that is just not perfectly done the first time around. I'll be excited to see how they manage love and relationships in the games going forward from here. Combat in Genealogy of the Holy War is in many ways the most complex yet seen in the series, something that might be expected for the next sequel, but I want to really stress how much more complicated it became with this entry, especially because this was the game that debuted the series' very well-known weapon triangle system. This of course is referring to the classic sword beats axe, axe beats spear, and spear beats sword system, which is just a series mainstay by now. But also included in this entry was a magic triangle system, with wind beating thunder, thunder beating fire, and fire beating wind. Meanwhile, light and dark magic beat all three. At this point in the series, using the right weapon for the job didn't add any extra damage, but it did add a considerable boost to your accuracy and to your avoid. But even though this was yet another series staple introduced in this game, that's actually not what this chapter is about. This chapter is about the elephant in the room. The big, big elephant in the room. Yes, that's right, we're getting right down to it. We're gonna be talking about two things that this game is most infamous for: its map size and its horses. Let's set things up a little bit. Fire Emblem 1 set the stage for what a baseline Fire Emblem experience was, and actually the later entries stuck remarkably close to that. Not this one. In a typical Fire Emblem game setup, you take your army from battle to battle, and although each battle map could vary in shape, when measured out, they would probably range between 30 by 30 squares. And that was if it was particularly large. The number of turns that it takes to complete a map of about this size would heavily depend on a player's skill and the speed at which they enjoy playing strategy games like this. I would personally estimate that a very fast player could beat a map like this in 7 to 10 turns, whereas a slower player might take around 25 to 35. But of course, this can bloat even more so if they're really taking their time. For a fast player, that's probably about 10 to 15 minutes on a map, but for a slower player, that's probably 40 minutes to an hour. For me, I guess I'm kind of in between, but that's not what this is about. Let's compare this map to a Fire Emblem 4 map. BAM! We're looking at about 64 by 64 squares here, and although not all parts of this map are actually relevant to play in, still, this is pretty typical of the amount of area that you're going to see in each battle. If we take these two maps and figure out the area by multiplying them, we're looking at about 700 squares here and 4,000 here. I hope that establishes a little bit of an idea for just how big the difference actually is. And strap yourselves in, everyone, because I'm about to tell you why it doesn't really matter that much. Comparing these two maps like they're apples to apples completely fails to take into account some really important factors, such as this map and all others in this game being split into very distinct parts. You see, you're going to be starting out at this castle, and your first real objective is to get down south and take this one. This map is actually kind of rare in that it is possible to go to the western castle if you want to, but the intended design is that you take this castle first, which nets you a very powerful unit which you can then train up against the enemies to the west. And that's the second part of this fight. After you take the western castle, the way to the last castle, which had been blocked off, finally opens up, and the battle becomes about navigating the forest and then besieging a castle which runs right up next to it, all while you're bombarded with spells and arrows. In reality, as far as I'm concerned, this map is actually the same as 3. 1, 2, and 3. This is just an early map, so let's look at another one real fast. This map has one of the most unconventional designs in the game. However, it still follows the mission-to-mission formula. Mission 1, Mission 2, Mission 3, Mission 4. Something that makes this map drag a little bit longer is that you will be defending with your characters over here in the east, but still, this map's progression is clearly delineated into these distinct sections. So if a typical Fire Emblem game, according to the first and third ones, has about 25 to 40 missions, we can take Genealogy's 12 maps and divide them by castle section to see about how many missions it really has. According to my math, and it might slightly differ for you, we have about 2 missions, and then 3, 4, 3, 3, 3, 3, 4, 3, 3, 4, and 4. Doing the math for you, that's 39 missions. Both the layout of the maps and from my own playtime reflect that this game is actually right on par for a Fire Emblem experience. But, that's not the end of the story. Even though this game's length and map structure does fall in line with the other ones, I can't understate what a big deal it is that all of your units are going to be deployed in the same place for the entire time you're in one of these massive fields. In a different Fire Emblem game, beating the map means that you will go directly to the next mission, where all of your units are redeployed together again, meaning that everyone will be involved in the next early skirmishes for sure. That's not the case in Fire Emblem 4, where the next mission opens up on the exact same map without altering the location of any of your units for it. What this means is that your characters with lower movement capabilities are at a massive disadvantage when compared to their mounted counterparts. Not when it comes to stats, in fact most of the ground-only units have the better skills and stats by far, but that means little to nothing when they are constantly behind the mounted units and not actually getting to take part in most of the action. On a smaller Fire Emblem map, this isn't really that big of a problem. A typical ground unit only has about 1 to 2 less movement than a mounted one, which means that over the course of 5 turns, if you're marching strictly in one direction, they're only going to be about 5 to 10 squares behind, something which means that if a fight breaks out, they can probably still participate. However, it's not until this effect gets dragged over the course of 50 to 100 plus turns that it can start to get really noticeable. While you can avoid this problem by just having your mounted units go forward and then wait for your ground infantry to catch up, it's undeniable that this is going to feel like an anchor for some, and can make it easy to understand why this becomes a source of frustration for so many players. Even bringing up all of this, I haven't even begun mentioning the canter mechanic, which is another huge introduction. Added to this game is the ability for all mounted units to continue to use their movement after taking their action. What this means is if a mounted unit who has a movement of 8 moves 4 squares to attack an enemy, after attacking they can then move again with the remaining 4. In the past, I've gone over the importance of positioning, and about how proper positioning allows you to force the enemy into a bad formation, or to ensure that one of your units can only be attacked a set number of times that you predict they'll be able to handle. This system of positioning was something that I really loved, and Canter absolutely changes all of this, both in positive and negative ways. On the negative side, this method of body blocking no longer means anything when you're facing up against an army of mounted units. They can attack a single unit in your army as many times as they want until it's dead, and it doesn't matter if you made any kind of formation. The only way to avoid this kind of situation is to lure in mounted units at the very last square of their movement capabilities, and then converge on them all at once, and just hope to win before the next turn comes, and they probably kill one of your units. No one in this game is going to be able to survive 12 attacks in a row on the following turn, unless their name is Sigurd. In the previous Fire Emblem game, forced dismounting of your mounted units was an added mechanic, something which is completely missing here. In that video, I was surprised to see a few people saying that they thought that this dismounting mechanic was a very important nerf to the cavalry units who they felt always had an unfair advantage in the series. Up until this game, They didn't. Cavalry units could not canter, and although they had good movement, they had pretty mediocre stats that made them crumple pretty quickly if they weren't being backed up by your tougher infantry units who could better hold their ground. At the time, I didn't understand how anyone could say that the cavalry units, who were already pretty weak, needed some kind of nerf. But having played this entry now, I think I get it. I fully believe that the perception of mounted units being overpowered stems right here. Without a doubt, even though your mounted units still have generally lower stats and weaker skills than their grounded counterparts, the ability to canter does change everything and always makes them the superior choice. There are some very fun but completely outrageous strategies that are possible now that can be used in every single battle that infantry units just can't do. Here's some examples. For flying units like Pegasus or Dragon Knights, you can now attack from unreachable terrain and then canter them back to safety, meaning that you risk absolutely nothing by depositioning them. If an archer is walking anywhere close to a mountain, he's pretty much a dead man. In other situations, you can use your infantry or tough units as a strong front line, and then have a unit from the back attack out, and then canter back behind your strong defensive line, also risking absolutely nothing. Perhaps the most devastating thing that's added to this game, which definitely benefits from canter, are the new mechanics that the Dancer class has, where now, instead of only being able to rejuvenate and give a turn back to one unit at a time, she is now able to give it to all 4 units that surround her, which means you can set up perfect runs of 4 units who attack, canter back into a formation, and then give them all 4 turns again. This system changes so much about combat in this game. To be honest, I was pretty giddy and a bit in shock when I discovered its inclusion early into one of those blind streams.
And it shows the experience numbers. Oh, okay. Huh? What's this? What? You can use your extra movement after you move? Wow, I like that. Well, I kind of wanted him right here. Okay.
I'm not gonna say that it isn't fun to play with a broken mechanic like this. In single-player games, perfect balance isn't always the goal, but I do think that its inclusion does make it harder for players to resist from using and abusing it. I do like the canter system, and I think it's a brilliant way to power up the cavalry units. However, I don't think it's gonna be very shocking to say that this is buffing gone way, way too far, and it's definitely easy to see why the dismounting system works better post-Genealogy than before it. I suppose I'm just gonna have to find out how it's going to be handled in later entries. Because having said just about everything that I want to say, it's about time that we finish this game off. It is extremely difficult to put everything that Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War accomplished into one tidy little conclusion. Because, much like this video, even if you attempt to shorten everything that it accomplished, describing the sheer volume of it all eventually just makes things run on and on and on. But still, I'm going to give my best shot at it. Without this entry, Fire Emblem as a series would look completely unrecognizable to anybody who knows it today. Introducing such massive inclusions, such as a fully fleshed out support system and weapon triangle, this game stepped even further out of formula and took even bigger risks than Fire Emblem Gaiden, and despite its rushed, chaotic development and last-minute system implementations, it would be almost impossible to call this one the black sheep today, just because later Fire Emblem is so deeply built off of this entry. For sure, some of the very maligned aspects like the massive maps and overpowered cavalry units certainly needed to be tweaked, but still, much like other famous diversions, my favorite being Majora's Mask, it gives this game a lot of its personality, and is something that I'm still glad that they went with, at least for this one entry. It is easy to get lost just talking about all of the gameplay inclusions here, but I really can't give enough credit to the extremely powerful and effective storyline, which actually managed to achieve Kaga's dream of both introducing a new setting and somehow making it into one of the most emotional and complex tales in anything in gaming. As far as I'm concerned, for fans of RPGs, strategy games, and later Fire Emblem games, or just great games in general, Genealogy of the Holy War is a must-play. The many commenters on my videos were not wrong. This game is something special, and I am so glad to have made it to this point in the series to finally have the chance to experience for myself. This game deserves to be recognized for its many achievements, and very importantly, it deserves to have not sat hidden by its limited release options for so long. Like many others, I am now extremely hopeful that Intelligent Systems does decide to give this one a remake, because not only only would I like to see some of its minor mistakes rebalanced, I would really like just to see it make its way into the hands of millions of more players. Still, we can't say for certain right now if a remake is coming or not, and so I just have to plead for anyone whose interest has been piqued, don't wait to experience this game. Genealogy of the Holy War is a truly incredible game. It is one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had in my entire lifetime of gaming. Don't wait, just do what you have to do and play this game. Having experienced the epic war for Jugdral's freedom, spanning an entire continent's worth of battles, I think it's about time that we slow things down a bit and get intimate. Focusing entirely on the story of Prince Leif and the fate of the Thracian Peninsula, our next stop in this Fire Emblem retrospective takes us to the most infamous game in this series' history, the brutal and beloved Thracia 776. Thank you very much for watching me, everyone, and if you want to get to see these videos a week early, as well as help support the channel, please head over to my Patreon page and give as little as $1 each month to make sure that this retrospective series can go on. You can find more information from the link in the description. Anyways, thank you again, everybody, and until next time, I hope you take care.